Hey guys, it's Casey, and welcome back to kind of some more extended videos on the series. I know in the previous video I said that that would be the end, but I've thought about some more topics that I should probably talk about. I've had some friends ask me about some things, so I'm going to cover in this video how we can do some different type of attacking modes. Currently, if we launch this up, we just have it be projectile based and kind of single target based, where we're just shooting a projectile, it's homing in, and we're dealing damage to one enemy. So what I want to set up in this video is how we can kind of differentiate towers into maybe being splash damage, maybe it only attacks a specific location and it doesn't home, maybe it's an instant damage and there is no projectile. So that's what we're going to set up today. So what we want to do is I want to open up my tower and I want to open up my data table, because whenever I want to add more functionality to my towers, I pretty much know it's going to come from our data table and our tower struct that drives that data table. So really, to me, it's just how can we kind of give more inputs into our tower. Generally, it's going to come straight from the tower struct, because once again, we need our towers to differentiate. If it's functionality that's going to be different between each tower, it's almost always going to be coming from our tower struct and our tower or our data table, our tower data table. So I'm going to make a new variable. I want it to be a Boolean, because a lot of this is going to be like a yes or no question. Or actually, let's set up a new enumeration. So an enumeration is a selection of multiple properties. So if I right click, and I believe it's under blueprints, we see we have here enumeration. And you can see that enumeration is a list of named values. Have we used an enumeration yet? I don't think we have. Let's see. Enumeration? No, we have not. Okay. So that'll be something new for this tutorial. So if I right click, I go to blueprints and I do enumeration. What this is going to be is this is going to be just a way of doing an ordered list. You can see the tooltip on it. It really is just a list. There's not that much special about an enumeration, but it helps organize things. So this is going to be our attack types. And if I open up the enumeration, we can see it's blank at first, but if we hit new, like a tower struct, it gives us a new row of data. So what I'm going to call the first one is I'm just going to call it projectile. The second one, I'm going to call it let's call it homing projectile. Let's do that, since that'll be how we differentiate. Well, the first one will be a homing projectile, which we've already made. We'll do a non-homing projectile. Let's see. I don't know if we can actually use a dash, so I'm going to actually delete that dash. Non-homing project... I lost it. Can we control Z that? Nope, and I controlled... Oh my gosh. When you click and highlight, it acts really weird when you do this. Sometimes it gives you the whole list, sometimes it takes it away. Non-homing projectile. That's much better. And the last one, let's do instant. So that will be our attack types. And then let's see, that works for me. Okay, so now inside of our tower struct, if we change the variable type of our new variable, and we go to homing, we call it attack types. There we go. So now we have this new type of variable under enum. It's a green pin. That green pin right there means it's an enumeration, and you can see it's called attack types. So we can grab that, and then we can just call this variable attack type. We can just kind of copy that name. I'm okay with that. Let's see here. I kind of want to reorganize this. I didn't do that in the last video we did. I'm just going to grab all of these kind of object references and move them to the bottom, because generally they take up a lot of space, and that'll organize that a little bit. Okay, so now if we go inside of our data table, you can see now we have this row, or this column rather, called attack type. And by default, it's going to be the first thing inside that enumeration. Let's make our bush and our chair let's make our bush be a homing projectile. Let's make our chair be instant, and let's make one new tower. We're going to make one more, so let's do that now, and we'll make this the new type of being a non-homing projectile. So I'm going to call this tower, let's find a mesh. Let's see, what mesh should we use for this one? Do we have anything cool left over? Let's see, we have a couch. I think a couch could work for me. It might be a little bit too big. It might snap out of our snapping distance, but it's okay. This is just for articulation purposes. So I'm going to call this couch. I'm going to go up to the name and do couch. What damages did we do before? We did stuff like what? Like 10, 5? Let's just do maybe like 15 damage. We'll set the range to be somewhere in between those previous towers. 750 is fine with me. Let's make the fire rates, let's do like 1.5. Let's just make everything kind of in between and unique. We'll make the cost 80. Sounds good. Let's make it not rotate. We don't want to do any upgrades. We don't want to offset it as far as I know now. We don't want to do any aura effects with it, but let's change our type to be a non-homing projectile. So if you look at our types, our bush is a homing projectile, our chair is instant, our upgraded bush is a homing projectile, and now our new couch is going to be a non-homing projectile, so I'm fine with that. So we need a, let's see. I think I'm good there. I'm not going to worry about any audio. I'm fine with that. So now we are going to shoot a non-homing projectile. But now that we've made kind of the framework of that data, now what we need to do is we need to work with that data inside of our tower blueprint. So what I'm going to do is when we shoot, that's where this stuff like comes into play, right? So if we go to our shooting code, you can see here on tick, if we have a target and we're not reloading, we will shoot. So what I want to do is, let's see, how should we do this? How can we reuse the code as much as possible? Let's see here. I think I would be okay with that. I'd be okay with that. So what we're going to do is inside the shooting code, I'm actually going to give us some space away from tick. That's a little bit close. So I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this a little bit away. And now what I want to do is right before we spawn our projectile, we're going to make a decision. So what I want to do is we're going to use a switch on enumeration. So if I actually drag off our enumerator here that is now inside of our tower struct variable, this attack type, if I type switch, we get a switch on attack type. There's many kinds of switches. Here's the attack type switch, and it's going to work like a branch to where when we come here, we're going to input our selection, and then we're going to get one of these 3 output nodes based on which type of projectile we are using. There's all kinds of switches. If we type switch, you can see we get a huge list. Common types are like switch on int or switch on string. So if we did like switch on int, we could input an int and then we could add a bunch of pins to it. So like based on if the int was 1, we go here, stuff like that. Switches are very useful. Enumerators, once again, are a very easy way of organizing. We get a drop-down box for selecting our attack type, and then we can do a switch on that attack type, and it's a really clean way of kind of going different routes with our code. So our homing projectile, we're going to do our normal projectile, but I actually want to do something else with our non-homing projectile too. So I'm actually going to navigate inside of our projectile, and we are going to make a variable, and it's just going to be a boolean, and we're going to call this, or should we actually do it in enumerator? Let's actually also store that enumerator inside of our projectile. So we're going to call this our projectile type, I guess. That can work for me. And then we're going to change the variable type to be attack type, and then we are going to make it instance editable and expose on spawn, so that when we spawn the projectile, we can set this information. So let's do that now. Whenever you change the information on the projectile, unfortunately we have to clear it, and then search back to tower projectile, and now we have our new pin of projectile type. Let's punch that on in. I'm okay with that. And now let's go inside of our tower projectile. And basically what we want to do is for a homing projectile, we already have the code set up, right? With a non-homing projectile, what we really want to do is we just really want to attack that initial location of our target, and that's honestly going to be this right here. So I think that's what we want to do. Let's see here. If we subtract that by that, I actually want to lower this radius right here. This was our check when our runner was dead and we were just homing at his last known location, and that we're going to just blow up when we hit that location. I made this number 20. I think that might be a tad too big. I'm going to move this down to, let's say, 10. I want it to be a little bit closer before it blows up. If not, we can raise that up if we run into any bugs. But essentially with our homing code, with our non-homing projectile, I kind of just want to auto go down to this code. So let's see here. Let's see. I believe what we can do is, let's see if this will work. I believe we can take our projectile type, we can do another switch. If we are a homing projectile, we want to execute this normal homing code. But if we're non-homing, I believe we just want to go straight to this code. And the one factor of code that we need is the last known location. As long as we have the last known location, we can go down and run this code just fine. So what we need to do is we need to set the last known location. Let's see, what is the best way to do it? One thing we could do is we could just kind of like copy paste this last known location down and do it here. But the thing I don't really like about that is we're going to be setting this last known location on tick. I just want to set the last known location once. So I believe what we might just do is do this on begin play, and we'll see if that works just fine. So on begin play, we're going to do another switch. So what I want to do is I want to grab our projectile type variable that we're setting, and we're going to say on begin play, or is that going to work right? I think because we're exposed on spawn, I believe this will run just fine. Let's see, I think that'll run just fine. So on begin play, we're going to take our projectile type, and if we are a non-homing projectile, what we want to instantly do is store this last known location. So let's remove it from here, and let's just make that go back down to there. Let's delete that. And we just want to store our last known location just as we did it here. And what were we doing? We were just storing the actor location of our target. And I believe that should work, so that on tick, if our projectile is homing, it's going to run its normal homing code. However, if our projectile is non-homing, we're going to skip this code, and we're just going to go straight to homing the last known location. And what we're going to do is also, if we're a non-homing projectile, on the start of our projectile, we're just going to store the last known location at that target's current location. And I believe this should work just fine. So I believe now, if we start this up and try it out, as long as we don't run into an issue here, I can see two possible issues. One is that maybe our projectile type doesn't get stored before this begin play happens. I believe that's not going to be an issue. The other issue is that we might tick and try and go towards the last known location before we set it on begin play. I don't believe that that is going to be an issue either, but we will see. Let's test it out. Let's see if either of those are issues. So actually, we need to do one more thing. We need to set up our widget to build our new tower. That's the one last thing we need to do. So if we do our tower building widget, I want to copy paste one of these buttons. We'll just make a new button. So you can notice here that when we need to make a new tower, there's a few steps that we need to do. You could, if you wanted to, you could try setting up procedural UI. I've never done procedural UI, but potentially what you could do is inside of code, one thing you could do is I believe you could do something like create button. I forget how it's done. What is it? Is it spawn button? I forget exactly how you do it, but there is a way to, at runtime, you can potentially, I believe you can create widget elements at runtime. So potentially one thing we could do is that instead of creating these buttons each time we have a new tower, we could potentially run through our code, get all of the rows of towers in our data table, and then create buttons for them to create them. But I've never really done that before, and I'm much more of a fan of just making the UI once, and then once you have the UI made, you only have to go back and maybe add some small things to it later on, but it's just something to take note of. So I believe we called that our couch tower, so I'm going to rename it. I'm going to make our button our couch button. We need to do a on click for this button, and just as we did before, we are just going to set this variable name, and we are going to set it to be couch, and we plug that in, and our building code should be all set up. So let's try it out. On play, we have $100. If we hit Q, I believe our couch tower, okay, we didn't set up the cost amount. Let's see, should we set that up real quick? How did we do that? It was on the start. Okay, so that's also another thing. Our event construct to set up our text, it also isn't very procedural either. Let's see. A good way of doing that. Let's see here. Should we set that up? I actually kind of want to set this up. How long are we in? We're only 15 minutes in, and we're going to be done with our code pretty quickly. So actually, I want to rewrite our event construct. And if you remember, on the event construct, we were getting the data table rows of these individual towers on these buttons here, and we were getting out their cost, and that we were setting it inside of the button. Let's actually run this a bit interestingly. So what I want to do is I want to do let's do a for each loop. Would that work? I think no, let's do a for loop. I think I would like a for loop better. So we're going to do a for loop, and basically what I want to do is I want to loop through all the buttons that we might possibly have, get their name from the button, and then we're going to go with it and set their text. So what I actually want to do is I want to remove this ending part of this to set up our code. So I'm just going to make the initial text of these buttons be equal to the name that they are inside of the data table. So we have bush, chair, and couch. So what we can do now is we can actually get these text blocks. We have our bush text, our chair text. Let's actually rename our couch text up here. Let's make it our couch text. And now what we can do is we can do a select. And a select is a easy way of getting out one of any of these elements, what I can do is I actually right there is I right clicked it. I should have actually showed you that. By default, a select only has two options, 0 and 1. If we right click it, we can do add option pin, and that will give us a third pin here. So we have 0, 1, and 2, and we can input a few different things, but here we want to input an integer, and what we can do is we can do a loop, and we can take the index of this loop. So we're going to loop from 0, 1, and 2, and you can see here we have 0, 1, and 2. So we can loop through all of our text. We can get the text out. That will give us that. And then what we can do is we can actually reuse this right here. So let's copy paste that up. So for each of our buttons, we're going to get the text. We're going to get out what the name of the text is, and that should give us the name of our tower. This is awkward because we need to convert it to a string, and then from a string we can go to a name. That's what we did there. So I just did from text to string and from string to name, and that can input into the table. And what we want to do now is once we have this information out, we want to set the text just like we did before. But now something interesting we could do is that instead of inputting like our bush text right here, we can input off of this select. Because think about this. The first time we go through on index 0, we're going to hit this select and we're going to say, okay, we need to get the text out. Which text do we want? Well, we're at 0, so let's get the bush text. That will give us the bush row, and then from the bush row, when we get out the data, we want to set text of, well, what our index are we on? We're on index 0, so we're going to set the text of bush text 0. We're going to do that, and then we're going to come back through, we're going to do it for 1, and then 2, and then so on. So this is a way that instead of for every tower that we have to set up the text for a new tower, instead of having to copy paste this, going to the end and doing it, this is a clean way of making this very reusable, so that later on, all we would have to do is come back. If we make a new tower to build, we'd set our index at 1, we add another pin, and just input its text right here into a new pin, and then it would be all set up. So let's copy paste this a little bit again. So this is the data that we were putting off before. Is we were grabbing its cost, and we were appending onto it the name of the tower space money. So we want to actually add one more row to this. And I want to copy paste down our code because we don't want this to be chair tower, or we don't want this to be bush tower. We want it to be the name of the tower. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete off this beginning bit, but I'm going to leave a space before tower, and I'm going to take the name of the tower and put it in the first row. So it's going to set the text of the tower to be the name of the tower of the row that we're currently in, space, tower, $, and the cost of the tower. And that should loop through 3 times, and it should do it for all 3 of our texts and set up the cost of all 3 of our towers. So I'm going to delete this from below, so let's see if this works. On construct of our widget, we're going to loop 3 times for 0, 1, and 2, which is our indexes, and then when we do our code, it's going to be getting out the info from our text box that we're selecting by that index of 0, 1, and 2. So let's see if that works. So if I hit play, and I hit Q, there you go. You can see it set up the cost of all of them, and it also sets up our new couch tower. That works for me. So let's do our couch tower, and we can build it. Let's build it there. That works for me. And let's see now, when we spawn our wave, does our projectile home? If we set it up properly, our projectile should not home. And we're not even shooting at all. So let's see why that is. Let's see. If we go inside of our tower blueprint, we select our tower. Let's see. We are... Let's see here. I think I missed it. So let's stop and start one more time because I kind of missed that code real quick. So let's build our couch tower. I'm going to build it over here in the corner. I'm going to hit spawn, and then before those runners get there, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to grab my couch tower. Let's see. Are we shooting? So we're hitting this. What is going on here? Reload is true. Shoot. Let's see here. Oh, we didn't hook up our pins. Okay, that's my apologies. Something very simple. We were hitting this enum, and our couch is set to a non-homing projectile. We need our non-homing projectile to also go to the same place as our normal projectile, because what we just did is we also just set up this projectile type to take it from our enum so that our non-homing projectile and our homing projectile both want to go to our normal projectile code. So I just didn't hook that up. So basically what it was doing with our couch, it was hitting this switch. We didn't have this pin set up. We just need to take this non-homing projectile pin and also hook that up to our spawn projectile. Now we should be good to go. Now let's try that out. Let's build our couch. Let's spawn our wave, and let's see. Okay, so that's a little hard to see. Let's actually redo that, and I'm going to build the couch slightly farther away, and let's see. There you go. So you can see here, it's shooting, and you're seeing it's not hitting our target. But I think there's a good reason for this. Is what if we wanted our tower to be like a splash projectile? Imagine it was like a catapult shooting like a big rock, and actually it's still shooting our target after it leaves. Why is it doing that? It shouldn't be doing that. So let's look at a few things here. One, the first thing I want to analyze is why were we not losing our target? So if we look at where was our code for that, this is why we should be commenting our code. It was right here, I believe, on end overlap. If the other target is our tower target, then we should be losing our target. So let's add a breakpoint on that. So I'm adding a breakpoint on when we should be de-aggroing our runner when it's out of our range. So let's try out our code and let's see why that was happening. I'm going to build my couch a little farther back and let's spawn our wave. So our runner is in and now it leaves. Okay, we're setting our target to be none now. And now when we resume, okay, so we are losing our targets. Let's see here. So we're shooting, okay, we're shooting and losing, we're shooting and losing. Okay, we're grabbing new targets each time. We're shooting him. Okay, so I think what the issue might actually be is, let's see here. On the initialization of our tower, we're setting our aggro radius to be equal to our range, and if we go inside of our tower acquisition code, our acquisition code should also be our range, or our radius right here. So what I'm guessing might be happening is that our tower is acquiring its target the moment it's leaving our overlap radius. I think that is what's happening. So what's basically happening is that we're setting our target right after it leaves our radius. We're doing our check, and while we're doing our check, the enemy is leaving our radius so that it's already left our radius, so we're never getting our end overlap and losing our target. So for debug reasons, I think we could do one of two things. One thing we could do is at the end of our calculation, right before we set our target, we could check his range from our tower to make sure that he's still within our radius. Or what we could do is each time we go to shoot, we could do a check to be like, hey, are you still within our radius, just to make sure. I think if we do a check every time that we shoot to make sure the target is within our radius, it's a little bit more expensive, because think about a tower that might shoot 5 times a second. If we're checking the range to our target each time we shoot, that can get kind of expensive, but it may be necessary. The cheaper way of doing it is on our acquisition code of just making sure that our target, right here when we do this set, that our target is within that radius. So let's actually change that right now. So what we're going to do is if we have a target and he is valid off of this pin, what we want to do is let's get the actor location and let's subtract that target location from the actor location of ourself. That will give us a vector with a magnitude of our distance. If we get the length of that vector, that gives us the distance. And let's check to see, is that distance less than or equal to our, let's see here, our range of our tower. So let's grab it from there, and let's do a branch. And if it is within our range, then we will set our target. But if it is not within our range, then we are just going to go straight down for checking for a new target. So we're just going to do that. And now let's see. So on that last enemy, hopefully that code is good enough and that we won't keep shooting at that target after he leaves our radius. Let's see here. So he came within, we shoot. We switch targets, we switch targets, we switch targets. Yep, it's working. We're switching targets. Let's see here. Now, hopefully, we stop shooting. There we go. Okay, that works. So yeah, I think that was the issue with that. Is what was happening is we were so close to the edge of our code, and that we were finding a new target almost pretty much probably within the same tick of it exiting our overlap, and that's why we were acquiring a target and not losing it. So I think that little bit of code fixes that. If sometimes you find in your game, like 1 in 1,000 times it keeps shooting, it may be worth kind of doing the same type of check on our shooting code just to make sure our target is still within our range, but that is fine with me. So how long are we in? We're 24 minutes in. Let's set up splash damage real quick. So what we can do is inside of our tower struct, we can do a new variable and we can just say splash. And with that, we can do a boolean. And what we can also do is we can make another one and we can call this our splash radius, and we will make that a float to be our range. So let's move those above our stuff again, above our references again. Let's make that cleaner. So now what we can do is we can determine which towers of ours are splash damage and what their splash radius is. One thing we can also do, let's think about this. What kind of functionality would we want with splash towers? So we could make it so that, let's say we did like splash damage with a homing projectile. We're going to hit our target. We could do this in a bunch of different ways is what I'm going to say here, is that we could just deal no direct damage to our main target, and we could just deal splash damage to everyone, including our main target. We could hit our target, do damage to our target, and then on top of that deal splash damage in a radius. We could, let's see, are those the only two ways? We could deal damage to our target, deal like a certain, like 10 damage to our target, and then deals 3 damage of splash damage to everyone in our radius. That's a third style. So it really comes down to kind of what style do we want. To me, I think what makes the most sense is that we will use our normal damage number to deal damage to our main target if we are using like a homing projectile, and that on top of that we will say a different amount of damage will be our splash damage, and that will be applied, let's see, to everyone that's not our main target. Let's do it that way. I think I'm okay with that. So what this is going to be is this new variable will be our splash damage. So what we're going to do is if we have a homing projectile that's a splash damage, we are going to make the damage number up here be the damage to the homing target, and that we will make the damage down here for our splash damage not deal damage to our main target, but deal damage in a radius around our target. So that's what we'll do with that. I think I like that functionality. So what we could do is we could set this to be 0, and we could just set our splash damage to be 10, and that'll be our way of dealing damage. But I think I like dealing main damage and then dealing splash damage. I think I like that. So we'll close this, and now what we will do is we will go inside of our tower data table. We will scroll down on our couch, and we will make our couch deal splash damage. Let's do a 500 range radius. Well, that's pretty big, but I'm okay with that for now. And let's make the splash damage, let's see, our main damage is going to be like 15. Let's make our splash damage be like 10. So we're going to deal 15 damage to our main target, and that will deal splash damage of 10 to other targets that are within our splash radius. So let's try that out. Although, since we're a non-homing projectile, we're almost never actually going to be hitting our main target. So our main target damage is actually not really going to come into effect, and we're probably only going to be dealing splash damage here. So let's go inside of our tower projectile. And now with our projectile, we need to feed it this new data. So let's make a damage, splash vector or boolean. So right now I'm going inside of our tower projectile, and I'm making some variables to handle this new data. So let's expose that on. Let's make it instance editable and expose it on spawn. With that, we need our splash radius. We're basically just recreating a lot of these variables. Let's make that a float. And then we need one more, and that is going to be our splash damage. Splash damage. And we will compile, save that. We get some errors because it says can't parse value. If it ever says that, just recompile, and you're good to go. So splash, default, I like it. Okay, so let's go back inside of our tower. Let's go to our projectile spawning. Let's clear it and recreate it. So let's re-grab our tower projectile. We get our few new pins, so we can hook up splash. We can hook up our splash radius and our splash damage. So now our projectile knows the data from our tower. And inside of our projectile, what we can do is we can, I believe what we just need to do is on our impact code, we need to do it in 2 places. So right now, or actually no, what do we do here? We're doing impact here. So let's see, what we need to do is, so what I'm seeing is that this is the code that we use for our non-homing projectile. When we hit our target location here, we just called impact. Impact before was dealing no damage. So I believe what I want to do is on that impact, what we want to do is we want to create a new event, and let's call it splash. So let's make a custom event, and let's call it splash, or that's okay. So it's called, we can't call it splash because we have a variable named splash. Let's just call it like our splash event. And what we want to do is we want to call splash, let's see, I guess a good place to call it is just on impact, because we're calling impact here when we hit our overlap. So I'm okay with calling it here. So let's right click and let's type in splash event. So this will make it so that if our homing projectile hits our target, we call impact, which we'll call a splash event, or if we're doing a non-homing projectile that hits our target, it calls impact. So now, no matter what, we're calling our splash event. And what we're going to do is off our splash event, we're going to do a branch, and we're going to say, hey, is this a splash projectile? If it is a splash projectile, what we want to do is we want to damage enemies within a radius. One thing we could do is we could do apply radial damage, which gives us a radius and stuff. But I tend to not like this because it seems to be super inconsistent for me. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I've had games where I've tried to use this, and you'll have like a bomb blow up in the middle of like 6 enemies, and 4 of them will die and 2 of them won't, and it makes no sense of really why. So I'm not a big fan of this because it seems to be really... There's inconsistencies that you seem to have no control over sometimes. So I don't really like that. So another way for us to apply our radial damage would be to just do a sphere trace. So what we can do is we can do a sphere trace. We can do a multiple sphere trace by 4 objects. That's what we want. And what we will do is we will make it start at our actor location. So this is where our projectile is currently exploding, is we will do it here. And at our end, we're just going to make it subtract by 1 and do it there, so it's just kind of in the same spot. The radius will be our splash radius. That works. Object types, we want to search for pawn, I believe. So we will leave it at that. We don't need to trace complex. All that is fine for me. And now we need to do a for each loop off the end. But before that for each loop, we want to do a branch just to make sure that we hit some things. If we hit some things, we're going to get our hit results, and we're going to do a for each loop. We are going to make sure who we are hitting. We're going to cast that to our runners because we don't want to deal damage to anything other than runners. And if we do hit runners, the one thing I want to make sure is that the enemies we're dealing splash damage to are not our actual target runner. Because as I said before, what I want to do is I want to deal damage with this normal damage amount. I want that to be the damage to our main target, and I want the splash damage to be to all the other targets around it. So that's why here I'm just going to make sure that our splash damage is not going to our main target. We're applying our normal damage here, or where is it? Here, to our main target if we hit our main target. But after we hit our main target, we're calling impact, and from impact we're calling our splash event, and from our splash event, that's where we want to deal damage to enemies that are not our main target. So right here we're checking, hey, is this runner that we're hitting within our splash, is it our target? If it is not, we are going to deal our splash damage. So then we can just do our normal apply damage. Let's see, our damaged actor is going to be this cast. Our base damage is going to be our splash damage. And as we did over here, we want our tower owner to be our damage causer. And I think this is all set up now. So I think that's good to go. I think that's good. One potential thing that I could see, maybe, I don't think it will ever happen, is that potentially we might destroy our projectile before we finish this code. I don't think that'll happen, but it is possible. So later on, we might need to reorganize this very slightly. So let's try this out and let's see if we deal splash damage. I actually want to draw the debug for this. Let's do persistent. I just want to debug our splash radius, just so that we can visualize it. So let's try it out. I think this will work. So we can create our couch, we can put it there, and let's see here. So it should shoot, and where that projectile, there we go. You see how it hits? You see how it's killing our enemies? Sometimes it takes 2 hits. Oh, I see. What was going... Okay, so that's kind of an issue. So what was happening there? If we run this one more time, I'm going to turn off the debug. It's hitting our enemies, but it's not dealing splash damage to our main target. So there is a little bit of hole in my logic. So what was happening is that with our non-homing projectile, we were going for our main target. We weren't hitting our main target directly, so we weren't having this event run, because this event is when we main hit our target within that overlap. We were missing our main target, but we weren't dealing splash damage to our main target. So that is a little bit of a hole in my logic. So one thing we could do is we could check to see if this was a homing hit. So we could do that, or we could change it from our splash damage also deals damage to our main target. I kind of like the logic that I was using before, is that main hits don't also deal splash damage. But what if we miss our target? let's fix that. So what I want to do is I want to make a variable, and I'm going to call this hit main target. Let's just call it hit target, and I'm going to make this a boolean, and that right here I'm going to by default make it false. But if we do hit our main target before we call our impact event, I'm going to call this hit target to be true. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go down to right here, and what I'm going to do is if we hit our main target, and I believe we need to do an and here. So basically what we want to happen here is that if it is our target runner and we hit our target, so if both of those are true, then we won't apply splash damage. However, if it is our main target, sorry, I forgot to close out of Steam. If it is our main target, however, we didn't actually hit our target, then let's deal splash damage to him. What an and does is it checks that all of these are true, is what it's going to basically check for. It's going to say, hey, is this our main target? And did we hit him? If both of those are true, then let's not deal splash damage. But if either of those are false, we will deal our splash damage. So let's run that code one last time. I'm going to spawn our couch. And now, when we barely miss our main target, but we're still within radius to deal splash damage to him, there we go, we deal our splash damage. However, if we did a direct hit to our enemy, say with like a homing projectile, then we wouldn't deal the splash damage to our main target because we're dealing the direct damage. So that was a little bit of, no, it wasn't too long, only 35 minutes about. So that's how we can deal splash damage. I didn't set up our direct hitting code. I didn't set up our instant code. We'll set that up in the next video, but that'll be super easy because we're not even going to spawn our projectile when we're doing our instant attacking towers. And I believe what we will also set up, I can't remember. I had an extra idea. I'll remember it in the next video, but we're going to set up our instant, and there's one more thing. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but we're going to do a few more videos. I think we'll at least do like 2 more videos to do some added functionality. And I think that's it for this video. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.